Good evening and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 117 of 2024, and I'm continuing the story of the three questions. The emperor was completely unsatisfied with answers to his three questions that he'd gotten from a variety of people, having offered a reward for anyone who could give him answers that he was satisfied by. Now, his questions, can you remember them? What is the best time to be doing whatever it is that you're doing? Who are the most important people to be working with? And what is the most important thing to do at all times? These questions, he thought, if answered properly, would allow him to be a better ruler, to serve his people in a better way, to not be confused with making decisions. He decided that he would go and see this hermit that lived up on the mountain, was known to be enlightened. But he also knew that the hermit, he wanted to see him. He knew the hermit never left the mountain, and that it would be up to him to go up the mountain to see him. So he gathered some of his men together, and off they went. They got to the base of the mountain, and the emperor thought to himself that it would be best if he disguised himself as someone poor, because it was rumored that the hermit would not meet with or talk to even anybody of great wealth that would come to see him. The hermit felt those people did not need his help. So the emperor put on some clothing that made him look like a common man. And he left his servants behind at the base of the mountain. And up the mountain he climbed. This was early in the morning. They had camped at the base of this mountain. It took him a few hours to get to the flat area where the hermit lived. And when he got there, the hermit was working with a spade in his garden, turning over the earth. The emperor went up to him and he said, "I have come a long ways to ask you a few questions. I'm hoping that you can answer them for me." The hermit nodded. So the emperor went on. "My first question is, what is the best time to do anything that you decide to do? Who are the most important people to work with? And what is the most important thing to do at all times?" Well, the hermit nodded again and patted the emperor on the shoulder and went back to digging. Well, the emperor stood there in silence for a little bit. He could see that the hermit was working quite hard. For every time he pushed the shovel into the ground, he groaned a little bit. The emperor said, "Please, let me help you with that." The hermit handed the emperor the spade, and the emperor began to dig. He dug 2 rows, and the hermit, who'd been sitting now, resting, stood up and said, "You've dug for quite some time, and I am rested now. Let me dig." The emperor looked at the hermit and said, "No, I'll continue to dig." And so he did. The emperor dug and dug some more. He dug until the sun was just about to sink behind a mountain, and he stopped. And the emperor said, I would like to ask those questions of you again. The hermit nodded. And then he said, do you hear somebody running? Running through the woods? The emperor stopped and turned his head toward the woods, and just then a man running quite wildly came out of the forest. He had a long beard and was just running pell-mell, but he was also clutching his side. And as the hermit and the emperor looked, they could see that he was wounded. When he saw them, he ran toward them, but collapsed halfway to them. The emperor ran down to him. The hermit walked. When the emperor looking down at him, saw what was going on, he pulled his shirt away and saw that there was a huge gash that was bleeding quite profusely. The emperor took off his own shirt and placed it against the wound to try to stop the bleeding. But when he took it away, the wound was still bleeding. He took his shirt and ran down to the stream, which was very close, washed his shirt off, brought it back, tried to stop the blood again. Still, the wound kept bleeding. It was deep. The emperor washed his shirt again and brought it back, soaking up the blood. And this third time, the wound, it stopped bleeding enough. Now, by this time, it had grown dark. And so the hermit helped the emperor as best he could to carry this unconscious man into the hermit's hut. They laid him on the hermit's bed. They started a fire in the hearth to warm the house up, for the night had brought on the cool air that descended from the top of the mountain. The man slept. The hermit prepared some little bit of food for the emperor and himself. They ate, and the emperor leaned his head against his arms at the table and was so tired from hiking up the mountain, from digging, and from saving this man's life, carrying him to the cabin, that he fell asleep right there. And we'll leave the men sleeping. Oh, the hermit went to sleep as well on some furs that he had, which he laid out in front of the hearth. Okay, hope you enjoyed. We'll hopefully finish up the story tomorrow.